Hello, everybody, and welcome to ASBN Live. Happy summer to everyone. Hope you've been enjoying the hot, awesome weather we've been having this summer, wherever you are in the world. We are so thrilled to be presenting episode 131 today. I'm Tulasi Sivalingam, the manager of programming events here at ASBN, and we're thrilled to be having our longtime member, Amalgamated Bank, presenting today's session. As a reminder, if you are a member, you can always reach out to find programming opportunities with us, and we're so thrilled Amalgamated over the years has taken advantage of this member benefit. I just wanted to give everyone an ASBN update. We will be taking a summer break for the next 2 weeks. So you will see us next on ASBN Live on Wednesday, August 31st for our next session in the series. And as a reminder, if you go on our website at asbnetwork.org, you can see all of our upcoming events there. So it's now my pleasure to turn it over to these two wonderful women from Amalgamated Bank. First, we have Janice Bermudez, who's going to give a little intro for us.
Great, thank you so much, Tulasi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Janice Bermudez, and I'm a commercial banker in the Western region of Amalgamated Bank. So as a 99-year-old institution founded by the belief that the financial system should be open and accessible to all, we aim to serve the greater good to this day. With over $6 billion in bank deposits and over $40 billion in custody and investment assets under management and clients in 46 states, we are the country's largest and oldest socially responsible bank. We are B Corp certified bank and are a proud member of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Since the founding of New Resource Bank, which was acquired by Amalgamated Bank in 2018, we have been a proud member of the American Sustainable Business Network for over 15 years. We are honored to support the work of ASBN and their members as their values-aligned banking partner of choice. 4 years ago, Amalgamated Bank launched Amalgamated Charitable Foundation with a bold vision to challenge business as usual and philanthropy. With that, it is now my pleasure to introduce Soma Sharan, Director of Donor Engagement for Amalgamated Charitable Foundation, who will lead a presentation on reimagining corporate philanthropy.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Tulasi. I'm so excited to present on how we're transforming corporate philanthropy at Amalgamated Foundation. Thank you all for joining this important conversation. My name is Soma Sharan. I am the Director of Donor Engagement at Amalgamated. In this role, I oversee our partnerships within our DAF program, which includes individuals, family foundations, and corporations. I also work with financial advisors and philanthropic advisors to build creative approaches to collaborate with the foundation. As Janice mentioned, Amalgamated Foundation launched out of Amalgamated Bank's vision to build collective power, to invest in marginalized communities, and to push the philanthropic sector to rethink its systems and its structures. We offer a variety of philanthropic vehicles, which include donor advised funds. That will be the main point of our discussion today. Also, we offer combined impact funds for different types of funders to pool together their resources to magnify their impact. We also offer rapid response funds so that individuals, corporations, and foundations can respond urgently when a crisis strikes. The foundation is a leader across the philanthropic sector, primarily in our Hate Is Not Charitable campaign. We launched this campaign as a response to a report that was released sharing that there was $11 million between 2014 and 2017 that went from DAF sponsoring institutions to hate groups that were promoting sentiments like anti-LGBTQ, anti-Muslim, anti-immigration, and other similar policies and hatred against marginalized groups. In response to this report, we decided to implement a hate screen to stop the funding of hate groups from donor advised fund sponsors. We also called on other donor advised sponsors to take this stand with us. I'm going to pause for a moment and share with you why this piece of our work is really personal to me. I was a young girl growing up in India in a rural village. There was a Muslim section of the village and a Hindu section of the village. Growing up, we would often have Muslim villagers pass by and offer fruits and gifts. As a young girl, one time a passerby who was Muslim offered me some fruit. A family member of mine told me not to accept the fruit because it was probably poisoned because they were Muslim. As a young girl, I stopped and questioned where this belief had been instilled in this family member of mine who didn't know anything about this person besides their religious beliefs, and suddenly created an entire narrative that was rooted in hate and fear. Since that day, this mission of hate is not charitable has been really personal to me. And in every conversation I have, I ensure that we are leading from a place of trust and truth and justice, as opposed to fear and hate. The foundation also has been a leader in the 10% impact pledge. What that means is that we ask all of our donor advised funds to at least grant out 10% of their assets each year. I'll talk more about the negative narratives around donor advised funds. We are also 100% mission aligned. That means the vendors that we work with, the nonprofits that we partner with, the staff that we employ, all truly believe in the mission of Amalgamated Foundation. So to give you a quick overview of the giving trends in the US, in 2021, there was $484 billion in total charitable contributions. Only 21 billion of that was corporate contributions. And of that 484 billion, 47.8 billion was giving directly to donor advised funds. We've seen a huge increase in giving as a result of the pandemic, as a result of the economic crisis and recovery, the racial justice reckoning with the murder of George Floyd. And we've seen an increase in giving to BIPOC communities, understanding that all of these issues disproportionately impact them. So let's start with, what is a donor advised fund? A donor advised fund is a charitable giving account at a sponsoring organization that's qualified as a public charity. There's 3 guidelines for a donor advised fund from the IRS. The first is that it must be a fund or account that can be separately identified and has contributions coming in from an individual, a foundation, or a corporation. The second condition is that it has to be owned or controlled by a sponsoring organization that can then provide the donor to the fund with a tax letter of their gift. The last condition is that the donor or corporation has to retain advisory privileges with the respect to the distribution of the funds from the DAF and also the investments of the funds. So there's a lot of benefits to donor advised funds. The number 1 benefit, it's an easy startup cost. There is no legal fees to set up a donor advised fund because the sponsoring institution has already done the due diligence and the IRS filings to do that. There are very low fees attached with opening a donor advised fund, as well as low account opening minimums. At Amalgamated, that opening minimum is $5,000. There is no annual payout requirement, so you don't have to give out any percentage of the donor advised fund assets. However, at Amalgamated, as I was mentioning, we have our 10% impact pledge, which does ask donors to give at least 10% of their assets out. It does provide anonymity on the Form 990, which is a legal document each nonprofit organization is required to submit to the IRS. So if a donor or a corporation wants to be anonymous in its giving, having a DAF is another added benefit for that. Donor advised funds have a greater tax deductibility than a private foundation. For corporations, the tax deductibility for a donor advised fund is 10%. During the 2020 and 2021 tax years, this was increased to 25% in efforts to increase charitable contributions. You get the tax deduction immediately once you make the gift to the donor advised fund, and you can grant out that money over time. There's also due diligence and tax filing that the sponsoring organization does, so the donor and the funder does not have to take on that burden. The DAF can be invested in a variety of investment vehicles that the DAF sponsoring organization will offer. And lastly, donor advised funds are a great way to not pay capital gains taxes on appreciated securities or any other appreciated assets. There are some limitations to donor advised funds. Those start with no grants may provide more than an incidental benefit. So you can receive small benefits like things like pens or paper notes or cards, things like that. But they cannot provide a substantial benefit to the donor. There's no reimbursements or compensations or loans or grants to the donor themselves. There are limitations around political candidates and political party giving. Those are prohibited from a DAF. DAFs cannot make grants to individuals either. There are other types of vehicles that you can utilize to make grants to individuals, which are structured like scholarship vehicles. There's no grants, of course, that contravene the IRS rules, and no grants to 501c4 organizations. So let's talk about transformative corporate philanthropy. So what does traditional corporate philanthropy look like? Traditional corporate philanthropy is really focused on direct service, that charity model, which is really important. These are organizations that are offering educational services, health services, arts, or alleviating the effects that individuals face as a result of injustice. Corporate philanthropy also is tied into brand building. Often companies will lean into corporate philanthropy as a way to increase their brand awareness, to increase employee morale, and attract new employees to work with them. Lastly, it also tends to focus on employee giving. So what do our employees care about? Where do they want to give? And oftentimes those can vary across issue areas, across geography. So what this new reimagined corporate philanthropy does is it takes the important pieces of brand building, of being tied to a legacy, of employee giving, and recognizes that they are important, but also recognizes that corporate philanthropy can be used as an essential tool of the broader CSR strategy at organizations. How are corporations using their philanthropy to express their values as corporate citizens? It's about using corporate resources to fund movement organizations that are building power across racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice. This new type of philanthropy taps into trust-based grant-making efforts. It moves away from the idea that corporate funders are supporting organizations and issues that their employees aren't impacted by. Rather, it recognizes that in an increasingly vibrant and diverse corporate environment, the problems philanthropy aims to solve directly are impacting their own employees as well as the broader marginalized communities. This type of philanthropy means leaning into the power that corporations have to align their assets with their values, to partner with philanthropic institutions like Amalgamated Foundation that ensure that their practices aren't causing harm to marginalized communities or building barriers for those communities to access this type of funding. So what does corporate philanthropy at Amalgamated look like? At Amalgamated, we partner with businesses to think really strategically about their philanthropy. By choosing to open a DAF at Amalgamated, corporations are expressing their values. That includes our Hate is Not Charitable campaign and the defunding of hate groups. So there's going to be 3 ways that I'm going to share with you all that talk about how you can lean into transformative corporate philanthropy. The first of that is really investing in streamlined solutions. So that means decreasing expenses, such as registering with the IRS, submitting any filings, any compliance, any staff time that would be required to run a corporate philanthropy program outside of a donor advised fund. Going back to the benefits, it also removes the burden of due diligence, grant making, verifying that the organizations you're giving to are in fact charitable organizations. And again, it provides that added tax benefit for corporations on an annual basis. Because donor advised fund sponsoring organizations like Amalgamated have really robust programs in place, corporations don't have to spend a lot of time building out infrastructure and can use that time to really identify what are the priorities that they care about and how are they going to build a strong program to invest in those priorities. So once organizations open a DAF at Amalgamated, they have the option to invest those funds into the public markets through our partnership with Amalgamated Investment Services, or they can keep those funds in cash, which then get lent out through the Amalgamated Bank's lending portfolio. This gets lent out to workforce development, affordable housing, climate solutions, specifically targeted at high impact organizations and marginalized BIPOC communities. So to give you a couple of examples of this, we had a corporate foundation that dissolved into a donor advised fund because they wanted to remove the burden on their own staff around compliance, around verifying if the organizations were active, collecting reports, and all of those types of grant making and administration burdens. That organization, once they moved to a donor advised fund, they have just completely streamlined the way that they're approaching philanthropy and have freed up time to really think about what are the key areas they want to invest in and how do they bring their employees into that program. We have another example of a funder who allocates a portion of their funds to their employees. And all their requirement is having one meeting with their employees about where they want to give those funds. Besides that, they leave it up to their employees to decide what organizations they want to support. So having an employee giving program is an option that's available to corporations through a donor advised fund. The second solution we're going to talk about is maximizing impact. So a key piece of maximizing impact is alleviating the burden of administration and management of the fund. But more importantly, it's really about focusing on systemic change in funding advocacy, community organizing, and civic engagement. It's about funding underserved communities, trusting organizations that are working in their communities to be their own agents of change. It's also funding these organizations at intersecting crises, whether that's climate disasters or broadly environmental justice, gender justice, LGBTQ justice, democracy, racial justice. It's recognizing that all of the organizations that are working to build power don't operate in silos. They are addressing the needs of their community across all of these different issue areas. And one that I think funders are still on a learning journey is being open to feedback. So what does it mean as a funder to invite your grantee organizations and transform that relationship to be one of reciprocity and having grantee organizations be able to share what does it mean for us as funders to reevaluate the work that we're doing so that it's more equitable, so that some of the power imbalances that take place in a funder-grantee relationship can be repaired. An example of a unique corporate partner is Amalgamated Bank. We have a close relationship with Amalgamated Bank, even though we are our own separate 501c3 entity. And Amalgamated Bank is a really unique funder. They decided to reevaluate their giving strategy and identify 3 key priority areas. Those were closely tied to their mission, and they wanted to just make a little bit more impact in those areas through philanthropy. And those areas were climate and sustainability, democracy and racial justice, workers' rights, and a new economy. They really wanted to leverage their corporate mission and incorporate a philanthropic mission alongside that. Key pieces of funding that work were dismissing requirements like extensive reporting or proposals, prioritizing funding BIPOC-led organizations, new and emerging organizations, and really investing in leadership development, capacity building, and technical assistance for grantees. Another example of a corporate partnership was the partnership between the WNBPA and Amalgamated Bank. In 2020, Amalgamated Bank reached out to the WNBPA because of the stand they were taking on issues such as voting rights, gender justice, and racial justice. So here are 2 corporate institutions who came together and wanted to grant out funds to organizations working in these issue areas of voting rights, gender justice, and racial justice. So this is a great example of corporations that are breaking down silos and figuring out who are the other funders in the field that I can partner with to magnify my impact. There is another global consumer-facing brand that we work with, and they are also figuring out what are the areas that we can let go of in terms of the organizations that don't fit into our mission, and find new organizations that fit that mission better to get strategic. The other non-big corporate entities that we work with are smaller consultant LLCs that partner with us to host different types of funds and work with us to strategize around the bigger corporations that they're advising across technology and climate. The last piece of this is really responding strategically and intentionally. So during times of crisis, how can corporations respond in a way that's not reactive? A big piece of that, again, ties back to streamlining solutions. So if you have infrastructure in place, it's very easy to respond and move resources through a partnership with Amalgamated Foundation. So corporations, in addition to having a sustained giving strategy, also can then develop a flexibility when there is a climate disaster or gun violence or another type of emergency. They can respond to that immediately. To share with you an example again, Amalgamated Bank tapped into the partnership with Amalgamated Foundation in response to the reproductive rights and abortion access crisis. And they launched a new fund as soon as the Dobbs decision was leaked back in May. Amalgamated Bank and the foundation recognized that this wasn't a standalone issue, that reproductive rights and access to proper legal abortion care was a fundamental economic participation issue, which was already declining due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in the anticipation of Roe v. Wade being overturned, we began having conversations with field experts back in December. And we asked them, what could a financial institution like Amalgamated Bank do? And what could a DAF sponsoring institution like Amalgamated Foundation could do to support this movement? And what their response was there are a lot of resources already being allocated. There are funders who identify as reproductive rights funders, as abortion access funders. But what about new corporations and new individuals that are stepping into this space who have never funded this work? What about unlocking those new resources to build on with this movement? So it wasn't Amalgamated Foundation launching a fund that already was in existence, but rather, how do we bring new corporate partners, new individual donors to support this work that they really haven't felt like they've had the right systems in place to support? So in addition to creating that fund, we also created an advisory committee of field experts and a few funders for the reproductive rights movement and the abortion access movement, who could guide the strategy for the fund and really help inform what organizations needed funding, what organizations were struggling, and where could our dollars be most useful. Another example of a rapid response fund was the corporate response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as soon as the pandemic started, we got inquiries from different corporations who were looking to support our pooled funds that were already hosted at Amalgamated Foundation. There was one fund that was a multinational, multi-donor pooled fund that was directing resources to essential workers and promoting an equitable recovery. Funders were coming to us across foundations, individuals, and also a lot of corporate funders from tech and private philanthropic institutions. Around the gun violence shootings in El Paso, in Dayton, Amalgamated Bank and Foundation created a fund to provide support to community groups. And also they funded groups that were working with corporations who have a huge amount of power in this area to direct funds and direct resources. And Amalgamated Bank also put in 25,000 matching grants. So that was just another way of a corporation going one step further. So instead of just putting in funds, how do we double our impact and match the funds that are coming into the donor advised fund or the rapid response fund? And the other example is around climate disaster response. So we're seeing a lot of times in times of crisis, whether that was Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ida, government funding was really slow in being deployed. And so Amalgamated incubated a group called Organizing Resilience that is women-led, particularly BIPOC women-led. And it's an effort to really rebuild the systems and the response when climate disaster strikes so that resources are available in real time and don't take, sometimes months to reach the people that need them. So we'll jump to Q&A and let's see, Janice, if there are any questions that have come in, did you want to just share them, and I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Soma. Thank you so much for that great presentation. We do have one question so far. How does one get started or get organized? And
yeah, that's a great question. I think getting started is the hardest part of this work. But when you partner with a foundation like Amalgamated, you don't have to think about what you need to do to get started as a corporation. So Amalgamated has in place systems and structures. So you will have a conversation with Amalgamated. We'll in detail tell you about what it means to have a corporate DAF with us. What are the fees associated with it? What are our grant making guidelines? What types of organizations do we allow funding to? Who are the philanthropic advisors that we're working with? What are the organizations within the same issue areas that you as a corporate funder care about? And we build a whole community around your corporate DAF and put you in touch with the broader ecosystem at Amalgamated so that you can identify what are your priorities and not worry about the administrative burden. We also have an incredible online portal that provides you with real-time data with your fund balance, any grants that have gone out the door, any contributions that are coming in, so that you can really track and see what your fund activity is.
Thank you, Soma. Next question, what would you recommend to organizations or business owners looking to decide between setting up a donor advised fund versus setting up an independent nonprofit corporation?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I'll go back to some of the limitations and some of the benefits of having a donor advised fund. It is an easy startup cost to have a donor advised fund. You're removing the burden from your staff to build additional skills around philanthropy. By opening a DAF, you're really leaning into the expertise of Amalgamated Foundation and its staff, who have a combined, hundreds of years of expertise amongst us in this field. And so I think it's a really important thing to think through what your funding priorities are before deciding whether you want to set up an entire corporate foundation, or would a DAF satisfy the needs that you're looking to fulfill. It also enables you as a corporate funder to, again, tap into all the other corporate partners that we have, all other foundational partners that we have, fund our pooled funds that are incredible and working across those intersecting crises that I was mentioning earlier, whether that's environmental, racial, gender, LGBTQ justice. So it gives you an entry point into an ecosystem that perhaps as a corporate foundation, you wouldn't directly or automatically have.
Excellent, thanks. So can donor advised funds invest in venture capital funds? Particularly, this person asking the question was focused on, or interested in focusing on funding women and minority founders.
Yeah, great question again. So yes, they can invest in venture capital funds and social enterprises. Of course, any investment returns are reserved for charitable contributions and charitable purposes only. Oftentimes, DAF capital is actually catalytic in funding venture funds and social enterprises that are focused on minorities and women-led funds, because this fund is already allocated as charitable capital. There's less stress around return of expectations or a certain time frame. However, you will have to work with your DAF sponsor and ensure that they offer those types of services. And Amalgamated works with donor advised fund holders in creative ways to come up with solutions if there is a fund that corporations or individuals want to invest in. But for it to really be fruitful and for it to really make an impact, those amounts have to be pretty substantial. It has to be an impactful gift to an impactful investment into a social enterprise or a fund.
Thank you so much. There's a question in the Q&A too about kind of related to what we were just talking about. So I think that you just answered this, but again, the types of assets that a DAF can invest in, maybe the question is, what can they not invest in? Does that include, other foundations, impact funds, startups, projects, et cetera? And did you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, so again, DAFs can accept all types of assets, whether that's appreciated securities, real estate, artwork, complex assets, but then also just cash and non-complex assets. Investing, on the investing piece, DAFs there's institutional funds that donor advised fund sponsoring organizations offer. And so that's really limited to the types of offerings your DAF sponsor is providing. So at Amalgamated, again, that is the Amalgamated Bank's Money Market Fund, which is a high impact lending portfolio. We have an incredible fossil fuel free public market investments, and those range across conservative, moderate, and high risk. And then we also have standard bond portfolios that we offer. So if an organization is really looking to maximize their impact in a new way, there's different types of vehicles that they can talk to their DAF sponsoring organization about and be innovative in the way that they can deploy that capital.
Great, thank you. Next question, how does the DAF report impact measurement by investing in a specific asset?
So let's see. Let me see if that question can be clarified a little bit by the meaning of DAF report. And if the person who asked that question, if you could just clarify for us what you mean by DAF report, that would be really helpful in answering that question. And in the meantime, if you could just throw that in the chat, and Janice, if there's another question, we could answer that perhaps.
Yeah, sounds good. So we have another question about how can nonprofit organizations be on the radar as a organization that could be funded by a DAF or any other type of pool funds or whatsoever?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oftentimes DAFs seem like this impenetrable entity that, it seems like there's oftentimes barriers to approaching DAF donors. What I would recommend for that is to really find out what are the platforms that exist out there that allow grantee organizations to submit proposals. So a great example is the partnership between Amalgamated Foundation and Just Fund. Just Fund is a BIPOC founded platform that specifically invests in the applications of BIPOC organizations. And so by going on platforms like Just Fund, you can submit one grants proposal into the platform and be in front of hundreds of funders. Another way that I would recommend building relationships with DAF sponsoring organizations is to reach out to the staff, share them with them about your work, and just send them information that you already have. I would recommend not creating a new narrative and new reports and new materials, but as a DAF sponsoring organization, we're really cognizant of the time that nonprofit organizations are using and spending on either new materials or reports, and we understand that their time is valuable and they're doing incredible work to support communities. And so how can we as a funder alleviate some of that burden and allow these organizations to just send us existing materials, and as soon as we have that material, that the organization stays on our radar. So I would just find a list of DAF sponsors that exist in the US, go on LinkedIn, look at their the staff that work there, and just send them a message, send them your materials, and say, if there's any donors who come across this issue area, we would love to have the opportunity to speak to them.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we did get some clarification on the earlier question about the DAF report. So how does the DAF measure impact on the investments made? And how does the DAF produce a report to show the impact that was made to present to investors?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that question, and a really good question. So in terms of the investments made, the investments from a donor advised fund are typically managed by an approved investments advisory firm. And so those investment firms are gathering reports on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis on performance and impact. And so as a DAF sponsoring institution, if your fund is invested, we make sure to share back with you all the returns and any materials that are made available by the investment advisory firm. So as the foundation, we're not creating new materials and asking those funds to provide us with impact measurements, but rather it's the investment advisory firm that's gathering all of that information, just like any other for-profit investment.
Great, thank you. And as of now, no other questions.
Great. Well, those were some incredible questions, and really great to see all the people that joined and listened into this call. I'm available as a resource to answer any questions around donor advised funds, around corporate philanthropy and Amalgamated Foundation's role within this sector. So I'll just share my contact information on the screen. Please feel free to get in touch with me. And a huge thank you to Amalgamated Bank for their continued partnership in this work, and American Sustainable Business Network for giving us this opportunity to share with you all how to really transform corporate philanthropy.
Thank you, Soma. Thank you, Janice, for being here and offering this really great presentation. I definitely learned a lot. I know all of our attendees did too. As a reminder, this recording will be available on our website later on today. So check it out, share it with anyone else you think would find this valuable, and thank you all for joining. Bye, everybody.